Welcome to Business Aspirin, pain relief for business. Clint Junell has managed a restoration company in Dallas since 2008 and is one of the top drying experts in his region. Clint is also the co-founder of JobDocs, a software developed to help his team manage their overwhelming volume of projects. On the podcast, Clint brings together business managers and leaders to share with you how they have overcome their business pains and how you can too. And now, here's your host, Clint Junell.
Hey everyone, good morning and welcome to Business Aspirin. I'm your host, Clint Junell, and today I have with me Andrea Stenberg from Purelight Power. Andrea, how are you this morning?
Doing pretty well.
Good.
It's early here, but I'm awake and well.
It is early there, and I am amazed that you jumped on so early, and I really appreciate you jumping on. Early where? Tell us where you're at, Andrea.
I am in Grants Pass, Oregon right now. So that's the southern side of Oregon. And it's about 7 a.m. So still pretty awake, but I really do enjoy the Northwest. If you've never been there, it's a really great place to visit, especially Grants Pass. Tons of trails, lots of historical spots. I love it here.
Yeah, so beautiful up there too, right? Like one of my partners and our lead developer on JobDocs, which is one of my businesses, is from that part of the world. And it's so pretty up there, right? And it's just I would love to be able to spend more time up there, but it's a long way from where we're at. That's a difficult journey. It's a difficult travel from Texas to Oregon. So it's really interesting, right? And we have a good friend who his son, we're partially a hockey family, and his son played for the Portland Winterhawks. And so they would have to make that drive, a couple times a year, going back and forth when it was season to kind of deal with getting him up there and some of that. But what a journey. Yep. So, welcome on. We're glad to have you. Have listeners that are all in on trying to gather information from the Business Aspirin podcast about what little pieces of information can we gather from these conversations that might help us in our business. And so tell us a little bit about Andrea and Purelight and your restoration background and all the things that are you currently.
Awesome. Well, so when I started working, I was like, I'm going to be a nurse. So I got jobs immediately into hospitals, and I did all the kind of those service jobs and worked my way into the clinics portion of it and decided maybe this wasn't for me after all. I love patient care, and I have all the respect in the world for people who can do that. But my goodness, 12 and a half hours on your feet, dealing with people sick and dying, that's a beast. Right?
Sure.
So it's very common that I've run into a lot of people that will come out of high school or come out of college and they got this one thing on their mind. They got a college degree ready to rock, and 2 years into it, they're like, ooh, this doesn't fit well. When I kind of accidentally fell into restoration in 2014, they were hiring a position that was kind of like their bare minimum part-time. And that year they got hit hard with a crisis level freeze that took out most of the West Coast. And they're, hey, you want more hours? You want to be working out in the field a little bit more? It's like, bring it. Yes.
Yeah.
A strong liking for demolition. I mean, it's one of those things where you don't really expect it, coming from the idea of being clinical to like tearing homes apart, working in the middle of the night, water's raining down on you. There's mold, there's things floating by that we won't mention on your podcast, but
I know exactly what you mean.
It's the thrill of it. It was addicting, exhilarating. I very much enjoyed every bit of it. So much so, I started just reading every book they had in the building about restoration. I wanted to know everything. And I got to the point where I did start to know a lot more about my position, and I became more valuable as a leadership person. I was training people without even thinking about it. I took a lot of pride in watching people grow based off of working with me. I could take somebody, explain things really well. I'm a gesturer. I don't know if anybody ever watches your YouTube, but they should, because they'll see lots of hand movement signals, But I like to explain things in a way that people can relate to. And then, of course, and when you work in blue collar industries of any kind, you have every age, race, creed, all different backgrounds all across the world.
Sure.
Very diverse. And so being able to train all of that different type of culture and diversity can be quite challenging. I mean,
sure. Absolutely.
Especially, I hate to say it, but it's the elephant in the room, especially being a female in blue collar industry.
Sure.
It's a huge one. That was a big portion of my overcoming for my escalation into my position. And safety kind of just came natural for me. So when I was making my transition from restoration into solar power, I found myself into a safety position because being in disaster restoration, you're literally just walking around hazards all day long.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All
a lot
day.
of safety issues. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. It get this natural ability to kind of look at a room and going, okay, what's going to kill me today? And that's a horrible way to think, but
Sure.
you have to. It's
Sure.
how you don't know what happened to that building.
Right.
What was in there before is now 10 times worse. And that kind of got me into that whole realm of, well, OSHA's there for a reason. Every rule they've made is not because they want to, but because someone died for it,
Sure.
or someone lost a limb for it.
Sure.
And I started really getting myself immersed into the safety side of things and made that great transition right into solar.
Okay. And then, so they brought you on, like, were you safety certified or like you were just safety conscious and they brought you on directly as a safety person?
Yes.
Like,
so I was
talk about how that worked.
Yep. So there's a lot of different ways to get into safety. Safety is very challenging to get into in some areas. Most people require a bachelor's degree. They're like, if you want to
Sure.
be a safety officer, you got to have a bachelor's degree. I had a tremendous amount of experience and a whole armful of credentials for certifications because I never had that time to go to college. I was a single mom. I was working a very demanding job, but I worked directly with OSHA officers all the time, people that would come
sure.
for inspections and help me. I would be calling OSHA saying, help me,
Yeah. Like, you need to come in here and take a look at something that's going forward.
Yeah. I don't know what I'm looking at. And then things have changed and they were wonderful. So working with them directly gave me a tremendous amount of experience. So I walked into that interview with Purelight and she had talked to various people there. I was very much tenured into all the lingo and what needs to be done. She's like, so if you show up and you're this, and this, I'm like, oh, that's a good day.
Yeah. Like I can do that.
Yes. And so it was about 2 hours of conversation and just me talking about safety and all the things I fell into. I was a chairperson of my last company and I just fell into it. And it was really great because safety was something that I was pretty passionate about because I've seen people get hurt.
Sure.
I've watched somebody fall off a roof. I've seen people crack their heads open. It's just, my goal and everyone goes home the way they came in. They're tired, they're dirty, they're sweaty, but they're intact and they're safe.
Sure. And I think this is an important conversation, right? Especially for our listeners that are part of any service industry, right? If they're an HVAC contractor, if they're a plumbing contractor, if they're, a restoration contractor, which is what I am. I grew up in the plumbing HVAC world and then transitioned into the restoration space. Like what you said was you kind of just fell into it as an accident. I don't know that anybody intentionally gets into restoration. I think we all fall into it. I'm not Definitely. Sure. Like it's one of those things and then we can never get out of it. You just keep fighting to be away from it and it is what it is. But I think safety is important. I think our guys can get a lot out of listening to someone like you and being able to go, okay, wait a minute. These are things to think about. We've had projects where we've had people like, on commercial roofs that the commercial roof collapsed with no indication that it should have and have fallen and have passed away. We've had some injuries. We support a foundation that in Dallas is part of the Dallas Fire Department, or not technically part of the Dallas Fire Department, but it stemmed out of the Dallas Fire Department, where one of the lieutenants actually was on a roof on a structure fire and it collapsed on him and he got tangled in it and he passed away in the fire. And so there's a lot around safety. I don't know that I believe any of us ever actually do it well. Like we do it at some level and we can always do better. I don't know if you would agree with that statement or not.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's like, there are things that we do. We try to be smart about it. At the same time, a lot of the guys in this space have been doing things the way they do things for years. So you hand them a respirator or gloves or whatever, and they still don't use it. And myself included. Unfortunately, like I don't always do things the way I should in the restoration space because we're in a hurry, right? Or whatever the case may be. And things to do and like to be transparent. Some of these projects are freaking hot and you have a Tyvek on and a respirator on and you can't breathe through all of that because it's miserable and you're, it's difficult. So what would you say in regard to buy-in on safety? Like, how do you get people to buy into a safety program or a safety protocol?
So that one's challenging because if you ever meet safety people in blue collar, there's usually a general trend that person that got into the safety as passionate as they were experienced a loss of sorts. They've either seen someone die or they're walking up and they're missing fingers. For me, I tell my stories. All right. And you have to have a story to relate to your people, right? One of the biggest things that I've noticed is there's people that are like, I've been doing this for 15 years and never had an incident. Or I have somebody who's in their early 20s who's like, I used to do with my dad. We didn't wear any of that garbage. I'm bulletproof ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And I was that person in my 20s. It was true. People would hand me more and more safety gear. I'm like, what? This is just slowing me down. This is hot. It's uncomfortable. I can't work with this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can. And I tell people, I said, the reason why I started working with it, because I had to watch someone get hurt in order to be inspired to wear it. You don't want to learn that way.
Yeah.
Having that candid, forward conversation with them that this isn't stuff that we're making you do just because. And a lot of them are like, oh, stupid OSHA or stupid rules or whatever. It's like, no, you trust me. When I had the same idea, I started wearing mine because I watched someone get hurt. I watched someone, I worked in an ER for 9 months and I've watched people walk in there with rebar sticking out of their neck. It's not unheard of. And especially in smaller towns, seeing these things happen on a daily basis. I'm watching roofers up on a roof with flip-flops, no shirt, no fall protection, nothing. And then you read in the paper 3 days later, somebody fell off a roof and they died and they were 27. It's kind of, we get kind of numbed out because of how often it's happening. Safety culture is something that you cannot let go of. You can't just have a safety meeting once a week at 6 a.m. when no one's awake and just say, okay, did my part. It's inspecting what you're expecting from people as far as if you set that standard for safety culture, like we're going to be safe today, guys, and explaining yourself and getting to that point where you're very transparent with why and staying on top of it, it becomes their natural reaction. If you ever watch loggers, have you ever seen a logger walking around without a hard hat on? Never.
No.
Never.
No, because it became routine, right?
It's part of their culture.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's something they automatically do. They roll out of bed, hard hat. It's just natural muscle memory, staying on top of people, building those things. They don't even feel comfortable on the roof without their harness on. They're like, I feel naked without my harness on. That's where you want to go. And it's a lot of work to get them there.
Sure. So in that case, what have you, like you're telling the story is what has gotten people to buy in? That's what your primary thing is?
Yep.
Is there a story you would feel comfortable sharing now?
Oh, sure. Mine.
Okay.
My favorite story. When I was in the demolition mode, I hurt myself so often I would even get drug and alcohol tested. They would always be surprised when I came up negative. And I was like, why are you guys thinking I'm like, because you're a tornado, right? You walk in somewhere and they even nicknamed me the Hulk at one point because I would take to just kicking stuff down. Instead of using the tools. I'm like, it's easier to just grab onto it, rip it off the wall or kick it down. My thing was I was sitting in an ER room getting my scalp glued back together one day. And I thought, I probably need to change something. This is not good. I'm going to get hurt really bad one of these days. And I have got to do something different. I had at that point even cracked my own hip bone. I'd fallen backwards. I've ripped open skin. And it took me.
What happened to the scalp? Yeah, let's talk about the scalp. What happened?
So, and that was the dumbest thing. So usually these accidents aren't happening during something rigorous or knowingly dangerous.
Right. Just pay attention then.
Yeah. Subconsciously you recognize that things are dangerous and that so you're more hypervigilant. I was bending down, picking something up and didn't look at my surroundings. And I threw my head up and I hit a box, like an electrical box on the wall, right on my head, right there. Now, this was a building that was falling apart. I should have been wearing a hard hat already just because of how bad it was. But I wasn't. And I threw my head up, hit the electrical box right in the corner, just immediate blood everywhere. And my poor crew, I was leading that day. So they had lost productivity. They had a mess to clean up, thanks to me, a hazmat one. And they were all, we're a day behind now. And then I'm sitting there at a clinic, making it, that's a recordable at that point. The poor company has to pay for that. And I'm just, bleeding profusely from the head with glue going in and losing a chunk of hair. And I was like, man, I have got to start just doing what they say. There's a reason why there was a sign on the door that says hard hat required.
Sure.
There's just nothing but dangerous things on the walls. And I was only going in for a moment too. I was only there for an hour. I'm the project lead, like I don't need to wear that stuff. I'm not going to do anything. It's an entire different realm of I empowered my people from there forward. If you ever see me walk in a building, I'm not wearing an N95 or a hard hat or the right gloves or a Tyvek even when it's required. Call me out and I would reward them for this. There's nothing more empowering to an employee than rewarding them for taking that extra step and caring for the safety of themselves and others. So I was very thrilled when someone would call me out for not wearing my PPE.
So I think that's important too. Like we need to talk about that. So, because that's one thing that might in fact help others buy in on this deal is, look, we're asking you to be safe. We're asking you to help your partners in crime be safe with you. We want everyone to be safe. So if you see something, what we want you to do is encourage them to correct it, but we want to reward you for helping them correct it. What kind of reward would you suggest to someone right now? In a lot of cases, these are small companies, right? So it's not like they can do a massive bonus, but what would be something that they could do to reward an employee who helped make sure someone else was safe?
So it's kind of a battle, but it depends on the individual. You have to know your employees. You really do. You have to get to know them well. A lot of the companies will even do a personality test right up front and ask them, how do you like to be recognized? Like, what makes you feel gratified in your job? A lot of people will say, oh, I love receiving personal thank you cards. Others will I like an announcement. If I do something right, I want everybody to know, right? Nothing wrong with that. They just have a lot of pride in what they do. Everyone's different. Other people say, I like getting a souvenir. I'd like some swag, a hat or something with the company name. Yeah. Really getting to know your employee, because what will work with one person where you go, hey, company, we just had someone do a great near miss catch, and that'll make one person feel good and the other person go, oh no, I'm not going to do that again. I don't like being recognized in my company. Right. Yeah. Understand you need to know your employees and take that extra moment. If you don't, because especially those that have a lot more employees are thinking, I have over 100. What do you mean? Yeah. That's what your supervisors are for. Going to that supervisor going, hey, you had an employee that did a really good job. They made a good catch. They were thinking about safety. I want to recognize them for this. Sure. And then talk to the person who does know them. Makes a big difference. I've encouraged this with a lot of directors. They're like, there's no way I can get to know everybody that deep. And I'm like, well, some of them can and some of them can't, but I understand, then who does know them? Oh, well, their supervisor knows them. I'm like, go talk to them, And it's really important that it's individualized, because that goes the extra mile for that individual too. Feeling anonymous and not measurable. If everybody's ever read 3 Signs of a Miserable Job, it's a great book. You need to read it. Okay. But it's not wrong. When they feel anonymous and immeasurable, those are things that are like, if you're doing something that makes them uncomfortable, they're like, man, they don't even know me. If they would have known me, the creating that mentality of care is infectious. Safety kind of goes hand in hand when you bring a culture of knowing and caring and keeping everybody not anonymous or immeasurable, because it just builds on itself. It gets to that point where people want to do things for you because they want to do things for you. They genuinely do. They care deeply. Even if another company comes in and says, I'll pay you $2 an hour more, they're like, heck no, I love this company. They care about my safety.
They know who I am. Yeah.
Yeah. And they customize my preferences to so I want to do this for them.
Yeah. Well, I like that. And I like the fact that it wasn't, hand them a $50 gift card.
No, it's
because
not. Because
the reality is in a lot of cases, it's not monetary. It's not what they're looking for. Right. Monetary isn't necessarily a lot of people think money is important to them, but it's really not their top 5 things in importance in life. Right. So they believe it is initially, but I like that you're saying, hey, give them a pat on the back, understand your employees. understand who you're dealing with, because we've had employees and we've done some trait profiling on ours. So we have employees that don't want to have a conversation with anybody, right? They're very content to just like, I've got this job and I want to be here. And if somebody comes in and talks to me, I'm going to be polite to them, but that's uncomfortable for me. And then I'm distracted on what I'm doing. And so, yeah, getting to know your employees is significant too. And, or whoever works closest with that person, supervisor, whatever, to know them and understand what is going to benefit them the most in regard to helping us be safer, right? And I know there's lots of companies that we deal with at, 372 days without an accident board, right? And some of those things. And that's great. And we might encourage that at some level. I don't know what your feeling is on that. At the same time, I'm like, I want to be for forever, right? I don't want it to be like, and maybe that helps, right? It's like, okay, we don't want to be it today. And we don't want it to happen today when we're here. We don't want to be the one that has an accident. But I think that is part of that culture and the safety conscious side of things to make sure that, people are paying attention to what they're doing. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a mixture of things. Accidents are indeed accidents sometimes. I mean, It's not, there are times where you can rip it layer by layer, because look at the weather, the circumstances. Were they distracted? Were they, yes. Those are all factors, but it's still a genuine accident. It was never negligent or malicious intent that they got hurt, or even them being lazy. It's just one of those, they didn't sleep well. They had too many energy drinks. That happens.
Yeah. Or well, I mean, even here, like a
factor that just made that day different.
We won't, not really marketing for anyone because I switch all the time, but I have them. I get it. I know how it goes.
That's going to be your only one today, I hope.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
Outside.
So, and that's the funny thing about it right here. So Dallas right now, it's important that teams work in pairs. I shouldn't have anybody going anywhere by themselves right now, unless they're going to the convenience store to get a drink or something, right? Because it's so stinking hot. And, I've had incidences in a past life where I was doing mold inspection and remediation planning for companies as a consultant. That's one of the things I did early on prior to jumping into the restoration space. Honestly, that's what moved me to the restoration space, was I knew how to do all this. And so I remember being in an attic in a Tyvek suit with a respirator on. We had communication devices inside, and I had a person that was with me, and I was trying to get the investigation wrapped up, but it was, summertime. It was in Brownfield, Texas, which is near Lubbock. It's, it's a hot, ugly, gross environment, right? Tight attic space. And I knew I needed to get some things done. And I knew I was getting close to being in trouble because I just knew I was sweating. It was hot, it was miserable, until the point that I started getting cold. Right. And so then I'm like, I'm in trouble. And I'm trying to now work my way back out. But then you got to be not panicked and still get out, not fall through the ceiling. But I knew the guy that was with me wasn't going to be able to drag me out of there. Like, so it's like, I got to get out. And it's an interesting environment where you have to make some decisions to be safe on some things. And the reality is, at some level, part of the safety equipment was part of the problem. It made it much more difficult, but we've got to figure out what's the threshold. And maybe we should have had better protocols in regard to amount of time we could spend inside the space. And, knowing monitoring thresholds. Hey, if it's between 100 and 120, you get this much time, and 120 to 160, you get this much time. And maybe establish those kind of things. So you do a lot of hands-on training safety-wise with your teams, correct?
Correct.
So let's talk about that, going into the field, evaluating teams. Not how do you evaluate, and then how do you correct without right? Like, you guys are stupid, don't do this stuff. I can't believe you're doing that. Let's talk about how do we approach that as business owners, entrepreneurs, managers. What would you suggest?
So, I mean, again, it depends on your level of camaraderie of your team, because sometimes I've seen managers go out there and tell them, like, don't be a bunch of jerks, like, put your stuff on. And then they're like, okay, and they get to that level. So, like, but one size doesn't fit all. If I went out there and didn't know anybody and was like, hey, you jerks, put on your stuff, they're like, who the heck is it?
And again, that's part of knowing your team, right?
Know your team.
Yeah.
But so the simple answer is this, though. You don't treat people like children, even though a lot of what they teach for managers to teach people is, if you have kids, you're like, oh, wow, I did this with my kid. It's difficult sometimes to remember you're dealing with skilled professional adults, regardless of their age. I mean, you can have a 19-year-old out there and he's still a skilled individual, and he's not a child anymore. He might be using the forklift as a skateboard one day and you're like, that's probably an age thing, but not necessarily. I've seen the guys in their 50s do it too. It's difficult sometimes to remember that we're not talking to children. We're talking to professional adults that we respect. We have that mutual respect for. Identifying that there's an issue. So when it comes to safety, it's a little bit more curt and addressed. So if you see someone actively doing something that is very dangerous, it's okay to kind of get that, hey, you need to stop now. Make that authority voice go on, especially for a manager. Resist the urge to make it a big thing, though, as far as going, blah, 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 like start lecturing immediately, kind of takes away from how serious you are, actually. If you say, discontinue the activity, I need to talk to you, come talk to me. No name calling, no belittling. I mean, just make it very serious. The more professional you are in that moment, the more they're like, oh, darn, like they're serious right now. If you start kind of like gesturing and like, like making it kind of silly or informal or just blatantly lots of swearing, it just kind of takes away from the gravity of the moment. And then explaining to them, because again, you're not a boss. That word is so bad. I hear it all the time. Like, I'm their boss. This is what I do. I'm like, no, you're not. You're their leader. You're going to be the one that's helping them. They are your customers. You talk to them like they're your customers and you know them well. You work with them every day. You can sit on the shop and, talk the way you talk for your camaraderie side. But when it comes to their growth, you need to be very professional and try to keep the emotion out of the moment, which is really difficult. And I totally get it, especially in that Texas heat. Whew, I get emotional. But it
gets to the part where you're like, that's a problem in itself, right? And you're like, oh, the heat never ends. And, there's emotion involved. It's high emotion. Yeah, for sure. I want to grab onto part of what you said, because you said, go ahead and immediately get their attention and correct. But then you said, grab them and pull them aside. And so a lot of managerial documents will say, hey, praise in public and reprimand in private.
Correct.
And I think there's truth to that. At the same time, if somebody's doing something they shouldn't be, that's dangerous, at least it needs to be, in my opinion, public enough to, hey, we don't do that, so that the team around them sees and goes, well, okay, what was happening? Okay, yes. Okay, we're acknowledging we don't do that. You can bring them down. You can have a separate conversation with that person. And then if it leads to needing a team conversation, hey, guys, don't do this, right? Don't do these things. And don't stand right next to the forklift that has something with forks fully extended that might fall off on you. Why are you standing there? Let's not do that. Why are you standing with your back to something where they're manipulating contents in vaults overhead where you can't even see what, like, I don't understand why we're doing some of this. And so communicating privately, correcting, reprimanding, but then potentially as a team, but not in an environment where you're attacking an individual for what they've done. Fix it for their safety, but don't attack them. Is what I'm hearing you say in regard to that. And I like that. Let's see. Is there something specific that you can tag on to that says, hey, this was one of the best safety training steps we've taken? Like,
absolutely. Oh, okay. So I mean, not to toot the horn, but it's true. My transition to Purelight Power was shockingly awesome. I mean, coming from the blue collar industry in itself, when I made it there, I was like, wow, they are very much safety conscious. They spare no expense, and they have all the controls and the administrative controls, engineering controls, every form of PPE you possibly need to get the job done safely. They provide, correct? But they're so massive, there's hundreds of people. So it's hard, it's for especially a newer company to keep that accountability on top looming and keep that culture tense. So that's why they hired me. They can kind of push that culture and remind people so it's not redundant information. One of the biggest things I noticed they started to do is when you think about training people, you got to think about more of modular training in a sense that you're using mixed muscles. It's kind of like when you're working out. You don't want to work out the same muscle every single day. So if you sit there and you have a safety meeting once a week and you read off a paper like this once a week, no one's hearing you anymore. You could ask them the next day, what'd you guys talk about? And they're like,
it's just noise at that point, right? And it's not impactful. Sure.
So with this company and then a couple of the companies in my past, they keep it interesting. Keeping fun in the workplace is not a bad thing. A lot of people are like, that's productivity loss. No, it's really not. It's keeping that mix of attention and care and fun in the workplace is not going to make them more accident prone. So making a video, or for me, I taught ergonomics once. I was wearing a light up cape, people were watching my arms and stuff moving around, just anything to keep it interesting and fun and different. Putting a poster on the wall, eventually nobody sees the poster anymore. You can have a poster that says employee laws, which is what we do. No one ever reads it. No one. And every now and then they might glance at it and be like, what's the minimum wage this year? And then that's the first and last time they're going to look at that poster all year long. Sure. It's really important. One of the best things I ever did was working with a company and making it more interesting, going from PowerPoints, videos, in-person training, documents, making it fun, making a game out of it, just keeping that interesting flow of things. And I know that's difficult for some people, but that's what Google's for. I can't tell you how much I've used Google to give me ideas on how to make things more fun. And it doesn't have to be the subject matter. If you know what your subject matter is, you can convey it in a way that keeps it interesting and keeps it a different muscle that they're working that day. Get them up, get them off the seat, get them moving around. Some people hate that. They're like, please, no, don't make me move. But it's important because it keeps them attentive and it makes it a different environment for them.
What's your cadence for safety meetings? How often are you doing safety meetings?
So at Purelight, we do those weekly. A lot of people do them monthly. Other people do them quarterly, which is, that's a little bit far apart. We do weekly. And a lot of people won't do them at all because they're just doing the bare minimum what OSHA wants. It's either, well, if you have a safety committee, you don't have to have the safety meetings. Like, ooh, that's not exactly helpful either. Safety meetings are really important. And then anytime you have a moment with a group of people, it's important to talk about safety. So we don't just isolate it to that one moment. If there's something that happens, we had someone who slammed their hand in a car door. We're going to talk about that. We're not going to wait. We're going to say, hey, everybody, please don't be grabbing the frame of your door when you're closing your door. Please don't do that. You're going to slam your hand in there, without using names and calling people out and shaming them for making their life decisions. We choose that moment to make an announcement, keep safety top of mind.
Sure. I mean, I love this conversation. I'm trying to look through some of the questions that I had in mind and kind of figure out what, makes the most sense. In your case, Business Aspirin is about dealing with business pains, and yours is literally pain associated with bad decisions. In some cases, it's split open scalps, right? So I like the information that we have. I like what we've talked about. Is there what's your biggest, right now, what would you consider your biggest success or your biggest challenge or both in regard to safety?
And this is the hardest pill to swallow with safety is something I had to accept years ago, because people say, if you could talk to yourself years ago, what would you say, tell yourself to kind of let it go? There is no such thing as perfection. As much as we'd love to see no accidents, everyone's healthy, happy, no one ever gets hurt, knock on wood, whatever you want to do, it's going to happen. Somebody's going to get, even a splinter's going to get infected. Someone's going to get stung by a bee. There's just things that happen, and it's just as painful every time and never gets any easier. So the one thing that is the most difficult part of my job is it does not get easier. I never have acclimated to people in pain or that have been injured ever. And I think that is actually very beneficial for my position. When you care about something that deeply, you don't lose your passion for it. It just gives you more drive. It's more fuel. And you don't want that. You don't want to have the more drive based on people's pain and suffering. But I have never acclimated to somebody getting hurt. I know that a lot of people can, and even nursing staff when I worked at the hospitals would be like, but
it's the same.
At their coping mechanism.
It's similar. In the restoration space, it's very similar to us walking into a decimated structure from a fire, where a civilian or citizen that's never seen that's going to be like, oh my gosh, we at this point don't have that effect anymore, right? It's like, okay. How do I need to address this? What needs to happen? What are the safety issues? Those are kind of things that we look for, but it's not, oh my God. So I can see how on a safety perspective, the people can lose some of somebody gets hurt. And, we have some guys that are frequent flyers, right? It's like, they don't have to they'll go home and it has nothing to do with work and they get hurt every day doing something. You're like, oh my God, right? Like, how does this happen? And so you just kind of see that as, I will attest to the fact that sometimes I get numb to it, right? I'm like, oh, okay.
Yep.
And it's tough to keep the safety going. Well, I'm excited and encouraged about your passion and what you're doing in regard to trying to maintain safety within your organization and being able to think through and come up with new roles and new rules and new processes for implementing safety and navigating some of those things. We might have some interesting follow-up conversation in regard to like what you've put together that you might be willing to share for some of our listeners in terms of documentation and safety programs. And we have some of those too for everybody listening. We have some safety programs that we would happily share, and, some things that we do that, we're trying to, we require our employees to back into their parking spots because there's been a study in the oil field that indicated that you're more alert and aware when you arrive somewhere to be able to park in than you are when you leave that place. And so in an effort to try to avoid the distraction when you're pulling out, we require everybody back. Well, you don't necessarily have to back in, but you have to be able to pull forward when you leave, I guess really is our requirement. So, if you can pull through a double parking spot and still be able to pull forward when you leave, great. But just some of those things, which are little bits of safety that we've implemented in ways and rules that we're trying to do. So we have some of that. Andrea, I think you've got some things that maybe we'll be able to share and attach in on the podcast documents later, be able to, kind of do that and make some things available to our people that will help them and do that sort of thing. Is there anything else that you want to say that we haven't just kind of brought up in this conversation?
Oh, yeah. I was waiting for that question. Number one thing for anyone working, it's kind of in that management role, owners or whatnot. Most of you, if not all of you, have insurance. You do. You have insurance on your business, and workers' compensation, L&I, whatever you call it, is part of that insurance. You have a tremendous amount of resources right there. Insurance companies want to help you. One of my biggest resources where I've learned the most was calling my company's insurance coverage and saying, hey, you guys do any programs? And they're like, oh, you want some programs? It never hurts to just kind of reach out to the resources around you. You are smothered and covered in resources, going to conventions, networking with each other, your vendors, your contractors, whoever you're working with. Keep that open channel of communication with them. Build that relationship. They have so many things they can help you with most of the time. And
bringing that up, in some cases, they actually offer discounts on your policies based off of implementing some of that they've put together for you. Like I know we had a fleet safety program and they asked us for that program. They reviewed it and they said, hey, if you'll do this, and I can't remember exactly what it was. And it was, it was a fine idea, right? And if we did that, we got an extra credit per driver for something in regard to our fleet. And it was well worth doing that. So that's a great point. And I appreciate you saying that. So yeah, like reach out to your insurance carriers and ask them, hey, what safety programs, protocols do you have that you can provide to us as well that we can, because they'll white label that stuff for you. Like in most cases, they're handing you something that you can drop your logo on and do a name replacement search and put your stuff together on it. And it makes a huge difference in what you're doing. That's a great point, Andrea. And I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Perfect.
I think we've got great information. I know we've gone a little over the time that we had committed to, and I appreciate you staying on and being with me and kind of navigating all this. It's great. And we may have to follow up on a round 2 at some point to get more of this information out, but it's been great. I've enjoyed it. Everyone, thank you for being with us today, Andrea, with Purelight and Power. We appreciate you being on as well. And we'll talk to you sometime soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.
This has been a Business Aspirin, Pain Relief for Business podcast. If you're a business owner trying to overcome your business pains, follow us on Apple Podcasts or visit our website for more information, job-docs.com.